Hello everyone, good day, good day. We are already in episode 7 sa ating subject na Biopsychology, and for this episode, pag-uusapan natin yung Biopsychology of sex differences. But before we dig deeper into sex differences, meron lang muna akong mga opening questions that I want you to answer. And in answering these questions, gusto ko gamitin ninyo yung inyong observation at the same time your everyday experiences. Okay? So the first question is, based on your observation and experience, who do you think is more caring towards others, boys or girls? Sino yung mas magaling magpakita ng care or pag-aalaga sa iba, mga babae o mga lalaki? Number 2, who do you think is better in handling money, boys or girls? How about number 3, who is more honest in romantic relationships, boys or girls? Or pwede mo ring baliktarin, sino sa tingin nyo ang mas nagko-commit ng infidelity or cheating in a relationship, boys or girls? Number 4, who do you think is a better leader? Whether it's in sports or in politics, sino ang mas magaling na leader? Mga babae o mga lalaki? And last one, number 5, who do you think is more likely to be closer to God? Boys or girls? Okay, so let's discuss ano ba yung point ng mga questions na to. Why am I asking this in the first place? The moment na pumili ka ng isang sex over the other from those 5 items, you already confirm na totoo nga na merong sex differences. Again, going back to those 5 items, no? Kahit isa lang dyan, pumili ka ng isa, whether your answer is boy or girl, kinukumpirma mo na totoo ngang magkaiba ang babae at lalaki. I believe 99% of students na tinanong ko ng mga questions na yan, pumili sila ng isang sagot, no? Whether it's more boys or more girls. I think napaka-rare or halos wala akong estudyante na encounter na ang sagot niya from items 1 to 5 is you can't tell. Because most of the time, going back to those items 1 to 5, you can tell kung sino ang mas over the other. Mas magaling na leader, mas closer to God. You can really tell that there are sex differences. Okay? So yun yung point ng exercise. But again, before we dig deeper into the biopsychology of sex differences, it's very important for us to master the 2 important terms you can see on the slide, sex and gender. Yes, magkaiba ang ibig sabihin ng sex and gender. Unfortunately, maraming mga tao na i-interchange yan na hindi naman talaga dapat. So what's the difference between sex and gender? Pag sinabi mong sex, biological yan. That is under the word of nature. We talk about physiology, we talk about body parts. We talk about chromosomes, hormonal profiles, internal and external sex organs. To make it easier to understand, kung gusto mong malaman yung sex ng tao, you just look between the person's legs. Do you see a male genital? He is a guy. Do you see a female genital? Then she's a girl. Ganun kasimple ang sex, no? While gender is non-physical. It refers to expectations that people have towards being a male or being a female. Kaya nga, yung word na gender, under naman yan sa salitang nurture. So, sex is under nature while gender is under nurture. Pag-usapan na muna natin yung sex. Zoom in tayo sa sex, no? How does someone become a biological boy or girl? Paano ba nagiging male or female yung sex nung tao? We need to review developmental psychology, specifically prenatal development. 'Di ba? Para makabuo tayo ng tao, we need 2 kinds of cells. We need a sperm cell and we need egg cell. So the sperm cell will fertilize the egg, forming the zygote. Later on will become the embryo, which later on will become the fetus. Okay? So I hope you remember that, no? So from there, paano nga nagiging babae o lalaki? It really depends on the sperm, whether the baby will be a boy or a girl. Yung egg cell, laging X chromosome yan. So ang content ng isang egg cell, laging X chromosome, it's never Y. While the sperm cell, remember there are millions of sperms that are released inside the woman's body. Some of those sperms are carrying X chromosome, yung iba ang dala-dala is Y chromosome. So yung magiging sex nung bata, depende yan kung anong chromosome ang dala nung sperm. So for instance, the egg cell with an X chromosome, if it is fertilized by a sperm cell with an X chromosome din, so magiging XX, magiging baby girl yan. Yan na si baby princess. On the other hand, kapag yung egg cell na mayroong X chromosome, again, it's always X chromosome, it's never Y. If it is fertilized by a sperm na ang dala-dala is Y chromosome, okay? Dala niya Y chromosome, then it becomes XY forming a baby boy. Ayan na si baby Brando. So again, if you notice in this illustration, no, nakadepende talaga sa sperm kung ang baby magiging boy or girl. Specifically, anong chromosome ang dala-dala ng sperm. Okay? So that is a very quick review on how sex is determined in the prenatal development. But let's continue our discussion about sex differences, no? Did you know that the development happens differently between male and female fetuses? So kapag nagde-develop na yung fertilized egg from zygote to embryo to fetus, iba ang pattern of development nung fetus depende if it is biological male or female. And that is due to the presence or absence of Y chromosome. So yung presence or absence of Y chromosome, yan ang magde-determine. Yan yung nagpapaiba ng development ng male sa female in utero. So kapag merong X chromosome, kung X chromosome lang yung nadidetect ng katawan, XX, baby girl, iba yung pattern of development niya compared to when there is Y chromosome or XY. Iba na naman yung pattern of development nun. Okay? Actually, ang pinaka-obvious na difference on how development will differ between male and female babies would be the genitals. So mag-iiba yung pattern of development of the genitalia, again, depending whether Y chromosome is present or absent. So kapag present yung Y chromosome, it will masculinize the development of the baby. So kapag may Y chromosome, ibig sabihin yung genitalia niya magiging more on external. It will develop penis and testicles. But the absence of Y chromosome, kapag XX yung dala-dala nung fertilized egg, okay? Ang development ng genitalia niya will be more internal. So magkakaroon tayo ng female genitalia, vagina and the ovary. Again, the difference between these two reproductive system depende yan sa presence or absence of the Y chromosome. Pero hindi lang genitals ang nag-iiba between males and females. Alam nyo ba, that difference in development also applies to the brain. So kapag may presence or absence yung Y chromosome, okay, it will affect how the development of the brain will go. So the absence of Y chromosome will feminize the brain, while the absence of the presence of the Y chromosome will masculinize the brain. So ganito naman ang forma niyan. Mag-iiba talaga yung forma, yung structure ng brain. Depende kung ang present ba is the Y chromosome or the X chromosome. Again, let me repeat, it's very important. Kapag Y chromosome, yung present, XY, it will develop the brain in a masculine way, while if XX, yung combination, X chromosome, it will feminize the brain. At iba talaga ang hulma in Tagalog, no? Iba ang hulma, iba ang hubog ng male brain sa female brain, structurally speaking. At hindi ko lang opinion yan, there are numerous studies which show na talagang structurally speaking, iba ang shape, iba ang hugis ng male brain from the female brain, again, because of the presence or the absence of the Y chromosome. So iba ang utak ng lalaki at iba ang utak ng babae. Okay? Now, in connection to this, gusto ko lang to i-relate in a biblical passage which I think is very consistent with these findings in biopsychology. In the book of Genesis, dito natin makikita yung unang pag-differentiate between two human beings. So, meron tayong human beings, dalawa yung ginawa, Dalawang klaseng human being sila. Yung isa, male, yung isa, female. Let me read that for you. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. Now, take note of this. I want you to observe something here. Kung mapapansin ninyo in this passage, nag-i-stand alone na yung first statement. So, God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Okay na yun eh. It can already stand alone. We understand that there's a God. He created human beings in His own image. It can already stand alone. Pero meron pang statement na sinunod. Kumbaga, it appears like redundant, but actually it's not redundant. Male and female, He created them. Ibig sabihin, hindi lang nakontento yung writer dito na sinabi niya na merong dalawang tao ginawa ang Diyos. The writer specifically identified the difference between those two human beings. One human being is called male, the other human being is called female. Kaya nag-appear yung statement na yan. Male and female, He created them. And I think that's very significant because the Bible is establishing here that indeed there is difference between those two human beings. One is male and the other is female. And that is exactly what we are finding out in the field of biopsychology. So far yung mga sinasabi kong differences in development between males and females confirms this assumption of the biblical text. That in terms of sex, in terms of brain structure, in terms of reproductive system, iba talaga ang babae sa lalaki. Now, let's move on to the nurture part. Let's talk about gender. Again, walang kinalaman. Ang gender, hindi na tayo nagre-refer sa genitalia. Although related, but gender, it's more on the non-physical side of sex. Expectations. We talk about rules. We talk about portrayals. Anong ini-expect sa'yo ng mga tao because you are a guy, because you are a girl. Now we talk about gender. Kaya nga in sociology, may tinatawag tayong gender stereotypes. Ayan. Gender stereotypes. Gender stereotypes are again set of expectations. Cultural ito. Hindi ito biological. Set of expectations that people have towards the female sex and the male sex. Kapag lalaki ka, dapat ganyan ka. Kapag babae ka, dapat ganyan ka. Anong sabi? Palakihin natin, pag babae ka, more likely you are submissive, you are passive, you are gentle, you are talkative. On the other hand, if you are a guy, dapat ano ka raw? Aggressive, active, worldly, tough, blunt, so on and so forth. Okay, so again, anong tawag dyan? Ito yung tinatawag nating gender stereotype. Very different from sex. This time, we are no longer talking about what's between their legs, but more on how they ought to think, how they ought to behave. At alam nyo ba, itong gender stereotype na to, according to sociologists, no, we are being taught. Tinuturuan tayo niyan because, again, hindi ito biological. Walang taong pinanganak na meron na siyang alam na gender stereotypes. This is exclusively coming from human culture. So that means tinuturuan tayo niyan. It gets into us through education and that starts during infancy and childhood. Baby pa lang, mga bata pa lang tayo, tinuturuan na tayo kung ano yung mga expectations na yan na dapat nating ma-fit, dapat nating sundin. Whether you are a male or a female. And a more technical term for this, even in psychology we use this, ito yung tinatawag na gender typing. This is a process where children are being educated about gender stereotypes. Tinuturuan ng kultura, tinuturuan ng society yung mga bata na kapag lalaki ka, dapat ganito ka, kapag babae ka, dapat ganyan ka. And who are the teachers, who are the agents of gender typing? Marami yan. Lahat ng tao na nakapaligid sa atin in our society are agents of gender typing. It starts with our family, nandyan yung mga kaibigan natin, the church, the media, and the government. All of them, what do they have in common? Tinuturuan nila tayo ng certain ideas on what it means to be a male and a female. One interesting thing about gender stereotypes is, did you know that this is different from culture to culture? So, walang universal gender stereotypes. Meron namang overlaps. Okay? Pero in general, mas marami pa rin yung culture specific. Ibig sabihin, sa simpleng Tagalog, yung expectations from being a girl or expectations from being a guy, nag-iiba-iba yan depende sa kultura. Let's talk about being a girl. 'Di ba? Yung pagkababae. Iba ang definition, iba yung expectations sa mga babae between these two nations. Iba ang definition natin ng babae sa Pilipinas, iba rin yung definition ng pagkababae sa Amerika. You see, that's what it means when you say that gender stereotypes differ from culture to culture. Again, there may be overlaps, pero mas marami pa rin yung differences. Now, let's zoom in the Philippine culture. Ano ba yung mga some ideas natin of gender stereotypes? What are some of these expectations we have in our culture towards boys versus towards girls? Okay? So, let's talk about the Philippine version of gender stereotypes, but a disclaimer lang yung mga i-discuss ko dito, yung mga mababasa nyo dito, hindi sa akin nang galing to. Alright? I just saw this online. It's up to you whether you want to believe this or not. It's up to you whether you agree with these stereotypes or not. Again, hindi ako ang gumawa nito. Credit to the owner. Okay, so sabi ng isang netizen na nag-post something about gender stereotypes, no? Ano raw ang tunay na lalaki? Okay, palakihin natin. Ang tunay na lalaki raw ay di natutulog. Number 2, ang tunay na lalaki ay hindi nagte-text back. Maliban na lang kung papasahan ng load, gayon pa man laging malabo ang kanyang mga sagot. Number 3, ang tunay na lalaki ay laging may extra rice. I think this is talking about appetite. Mas malakas kumain ng mga lalaki compared sa mga babae. Number 4, ang tunay na lalaki ay hindi vegetarian. Number 5, ang tunay na lalaki ay walang abs. Dapat daw beer belly para maging tunay ang pagkalalaki mo. Again, inuulit ko no para para hindi ako ma-misinterpret, hindi ako ang nagsasabi nito hindi ako. Credit to the owner of this post. Ituloy natin. Ang tunay na lalaki ay hindi sumasayaw. Number 7, ang tunay na lalaki ay umaamin ng pagkakamali sa kapwa tunay na lalaki. Parang ito yung tinatawag nating bro code or usapang lalaki. Number 8, ang tunay na lalaki ay laging may, pasintabi sa mga kumakain. Okay na lang bahala mag-interpret kung anong ibig sabihin ng number 8. Pero I think ang take ko dito sa number 8 is when it comes to being rugged. No? Parang ang society ine-expect na yung mga lalaki hindi masyadong malinis. Kami yung kami yung sex na we get our hands dirty. We get the job done. Yan, parang ganun yung sinasabi nung number 8. In a disgusting way, of course, no? Anyway, tuloy natin. Number 9, ang tunay na lalaki ay di naghuhugas ng pinggan o nagliligpit ng kanyang mga gamit dahil may mga babaeng gagawa nun para sa kanya. Mas lalong nagiging tunay ang pagkalalaki kung di niya kilala o di niya maalala ang pangalan ng babae. Again, credit to the owner, this is not me. Sounds sexist, right? Pero mamaya, pag-uusapan natin yan, no? The idea of sexism. Kailan ba nagiging sexist yung mga ganyang statements? Is number 9 a sexist statement? Later on, let's talk about this. And last one, number 10, ang tunay na lalaki ay di nagsisimba. Hindi ko talaga gets yung point na yan. Bakit? Okay? Anyway, let's move on sa tunay na babae. So kung may tunay na lalaki, syempre, meron ding tunay na babae. Ano raw ang tunay na babae? Palakihin natin. Ang tunay na babae ay palaging undecided. Agree ba kayo dyan? Next, number 2, ano lang to, typo. Errors lang to in numbering, pero dapat number 2 ito, no? Ang tunay na babae ay pwedeng mainis sa kapwa babae for no apparent reason. Girls, do you agree? Naiinis ka na walang rason. Wala lang, inis ka lang. Number 4, ang tunay na babae ay hindi umaalis ng bahay nang walang shaver. Parang na-delete ko yata yung number 2, no? Pero ituloy na lang natin. Number 5, ang tunay na babae ay kayang hindi humiga ng 3 oras pag naka-cocktail dress na fit. Again, girls, go back to your experience and on your observations. Totoo ba yan? Number 6, ang tunay na babae ay may default answer na wala pag tinanong kung may problema ba. Actually, masasagot din nito. Makakasagot din ito mga boys, no? When dealing with girls, totoo ba yan, boys? Tanungin mo kung may problema ba, sasabihin wala. Alright? Number 7, ang tunay na babae ay may corresponding song sa bawat development stage ng love life. Lagi siya nakaka-relate sa mga kanta. Number 8, ang tunay na babae ay nag-check lagi ng cellphone. So, it's a female-oriented behavior daw pag panay check ng cellphone. No? I don't know if you will agree with that. Number 9, ang tunay na babae ay hindi mauunang magsabi ng I love you. I think in our culture, this is very true. Isa yan sa mga expectations. Sa mga kababaihan, huwag ikaw ang aamin. Huwag ikaw ang magsasabi ng I love you. Antayin mo yung lalaki na magsabi, antayin mo yung lalaki na ligawan ka. Something like that, no? And last one, number 10, ang tunay na babae ay laging kailangan ng proof. Alright? So, yun yung mga indicators kung ikaw raw ay tunay na lalaki or tunay na babae, which are all statements of what? Stereotypes. Hindi ito sex. We are no longer talking about sex. This is gender stereotypes. But let's combine everything that I have been discussing so far. Ano lang ba yung na-establish natin ngayon so far? After discussing the difference between sex and gender, well, the bottom line here is males and females are different. Totoo talaga yung sex differences. Iba ang maging lalaki, iba rin ang maging babae, both in the physiological level, again, when we talk about the genitals and the brain, and the cultural level when we talk about stereotypes. Hindi natin pwedeng i-deny yung idea of sex differences. In fact, pwede mo ngang i-relate yung dalawang levels na yan eh. Diba? We are different in the physiological level and in the cultural level. Actually, maraming mga stereotypes, gender stereotypes in the cultural level, ang basis niyan is physiological level. So may mga stereotypes tayo between males and females, naniniwala tayong iba ang males and females in the cultural level kasi meron siyang physiological basis. Meron siyang biological reason. Gets nyo? So, the implication of this, after everything I've been discussing so far is, again, sex differences are real. Totoo yan. Hindi natin pwedeng i-deny. Huwag natin sasabihin na ang sex differences, gawa-gawa lang yan ng tao. Gawa-gawa lang yan ng mga lalaki. Because again, in the biological level, we are really programmed to be different. Males different from females. Another implication in connection to this, believing in sex differences does not make you a sexist. Kasi may mga tao masyadong lenient sa pag-define ng sexist. Marinig lang nila na naniniwala ka na iba ang lalaki sa babae, ang tawag na nila sa'yo sexist. Not necessarily. You can believe in sex differences, pero hindi automatic yon na ibig sabihin sexist ka na. So what defines a sexist? Kailan nagiging sexist ang isang tao? As we go along, we will talk about that. Pero so far, ang gusto ko lang malaman ninyo, you can believe in sex differences, and you should. Marami tayong data dyan in biopsychology, but hindi ibig sabihin nun, sexist ka. Alright? So, for the next part of our lecture, let's talk about some of the big ideas na nalaman natin on the biopsychology of sex differences. Big idea number 1. Biological differences, specifically brain, structural differences in the brain between males and females is real. Totoo. Totoong iba ang hubog ng utak ng babae sa lalaki, and that starts in utero pa lang. One good book and one good author who further elaborates on this is John Gray. Yung nagsulat ng popular na libro, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. Again, please don't judge the book by saying it's a very sexist book. Balikan lang natin yung principle natin kanina, hindi porket naniniwala kang may pagkakaiba ang males at females, ibig sabihin sexist ka na, so that means this book does not follow it's a sexist book or John Gray is a sexist author. Alright? So, yan yung pinapakita ni Dr. John Gray, who is a clinical psychologist specializing in human relationships. Yan yung pinapakita niya sa libro. Now, when we talk about male and female brains, structurally different talaga sila. And again, if you remember, bakit different yung male and female brain, may kinalaman yan sa presence or absence of the Y chromosome. In the human development, in utero, when the body senses na merong presence ng Y chromosome, it will masculinize the brain. Kapag walang presence ng Y chromosome, parehong X chromosome, it will feminize the brain. May kinalaman yan sa presence ng testosterone. Kapag Y chromosome kasi, yung present doon sa developing baby, mas mataas yung testosterone level of the uterine environment, which will again masculinize the brain. Alright? Number 2, some biological differences, again we're talking about brain differences, can be translated to psychological differences. So hindi lang basta-basta iba yung hubog o yung hugis ng male sa female brain. Yung differences nila, yung differences ng brain, structural differences in the brain, natatranslate yan sa psychological differences. And that's very interesting. It only means that one of the reasons why males and females at times act differently, think differently, talk differently, has biological basis. Kaya iba ang ugali ng lalaki sa ugali ng babae kasi meron palang biological reasons yan. Let me give you some examples when we talk about competitiveness. Yung pagiging competitive. Data shows in biopsychology na mas mataas talaga yung level of being competitive ng mga lalaki compared to girls. And it's very tempting to think or to explain bakit mas competitive ang mga boys than girls. Kasi cultural yan eh. We evolved to be like that. Because the guy is the head of the family, so on and so forth. Again, sounds logical. Pero if you go down to the biological level, merong biological basis of competitiveness. Hindi ito 100% cultural. Bakit mas competitive ang mga boys than girls? Again, brain differences. Yung mga parte kasi ng brain ng tao that handles competitiveness, it is much more developed in the brains of males than females. Question, why? Again, human development. Biological reasons. Sadyang ganun lang talaga mag-develop yung brain ng lalaki. Yung parts of the brain that is very related to being competitiveness, it's more developed, it's more active in the male brain than in the female brain. Other qualities na iba ang boys compared to girls would include the following: visuospatial skills. Ang daming data dyan. Iba talaga ang capabilities of males and females in terms of that. Language processing, iba rin ng males and females. Experience of emotions, expression of emotions, iba rin ng pattern ang male and female. And again, where do you attribute all this? Ano ang explanation mo? Bakit iba ang males and females in terms of these psychological skills? It's not only cultural, it's very biological. It has something to do with the structural differences of the brain. Alright? Nagigets nyo? So going back, i-relate natin to sa gender stereotypes. I want you to realize something. Based on what I'm saying so far, do you realize na yung gender stereotypes pala na to, we can say, hindi ito 100% cultural. Although again, may pagka-cultural ang gender stereotypes. Ginawa ng kultura yan. Pero, yung mga paniniwala natin about sex differences, pag babae ka, ganito ka. Pag lalaki ka, ganyan ka. Hindi siya 100% cultural. Meron palang biological basis yan. That's what I want you to realize so far. You cannot say that the ideas we have about how the sexes are different from each other is based on the biased thinking of a patriarchal society. Kasi meron talaga tayong pagkakaiba, male and female differences na merong biological basis. And again, let me repeat. Kanina ko pa sinasabi to, that does not make you a sexist. Meron tayong mga empirical evidences on that. Na iba ang babae at iba ang lalaki, and that's not enough to be considered a sexist. Okay? Pero once and for all, ito na. Dito na natin ipasok yung sexism. Although males and females are different, their brains are different, which explains why some of our patterns are different from each other. These differences must not be used as a basis to support sex discrimination. Diyan na ngayon nagkakatalo kasi. Wala namang masama na magkaiba ang babae sa lalaki. Nagiging masama lang yan, nagiging sexist na when you use those differences to justify why you treat the sexes differently. Kapag meron ng isang sex ang nakakalamang over the other, because you are misusing the differences between the sexes. Ganito nabubuo ang sexism. Let me explain. No? It starts here. You acknowledge that there is sex difference between males and females. Again, at that level, at this point, hindi ka pa sexist niyan. Dapat mo nga paniwalaan yan eh. Kasi scientific claim yan. Totoo yan. That's the truth. My sex is different from the other sex. Pero, kailan nagiging sexist? Ayan na. Kapag in-extend mo na yan to this statement, my sex is differently better than the other sex. Kapag nilagyan mo na ngayon ng hierarchy, kapag nag-assign ka na ng value, kapag sinabi mo na yung sex mo is more valuable than the other sex, doon na ngayon nagiging sexist. Nagigets nyo? So, hindi sapat. It's not enough for you to be a sexist when you just stop here. Because again, sex differences are real. But once you use the idea of sex differences to assign value to your own sex, when you assign more value to your own sex and less value to the other sex, then you become a sexist. Tapos i-translate mo pa sa behaviors mo yan. Dahil naniniwala ka na mas okay, mas magaling yung sex mo than the other sex, ayun na. Nagiging bias ka na sa lesser sex, nagiging sexist ka na. Hindi ka na kumakausap ng opposite sex. Hindi ka tumatanggap ng opposite sex. Mas maliit yung sweldo ng opposite sex. Ayun na. Tinatranslate mo na yung sex differences in a negative way. Oh. Kaya para maiwasan yung sexism, ang simpleng idea lang dito is again, let's promote this. Let's educate people on this, that differences is not equal to inferiority or superiority. Hindi mo pwedeng gamitin yung pagkakaiba ng boys and girls para i-justify who is more inferior than the other or who is more superior than the other. We can be different, but still both important, but still both valuable. Maliwanag. Mag-ingat kayo sa mga tao na misinterpret yung Bible to justify sexism. Meron ako mga ganyang naririnig. Kinukote yung Genesis that I discussed a while ago. Diba? Oh, sorry, ito, yung Genesis in chapter 2, verse 18. My apologies. The Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." Ginagamit pa yung statement na yan to justify sexism. Sasabihin ng mga tao, kita mo na, sa Genesis sinasabi, yung babae was created to be a helper for the man. Helper. Oh. Eh di mas mababa, helper eh. But for those of you who think that way, if you hear someone saying something like that, I want you to correct that person. Kinakailangan mong matuto ng basic biblical interpretation. You have to search for the original context, for the original language, before you translate passages like this. Like for instance, in this passage, the word helper here, in the original Hebrew word na ginamit in the book of Genesis, helper here is equivalent to the word ezer. And what is ezer? Ezer is a kind of help that has nothing to do with status. That's the word help or helper in this passage. Isang tao na tumutulong sa isa pang tao, but that help does not connote, does not establish that one is higher than the other. Tumutulong lang siya sa taong yon, pero walang kinalaman yon sa hierarchy. Who is higher than the other? Let me give you one example. Let's say naglalakad ako sa Taft Avenue. Kinuha ko yung wallet ko, nahulog yung mga barya. Oh, nagkalat sa Taft Avenue. Until there was this one guy who saw what happened, kinuha niya yung mga barya, tinulungan niya ako to get the money na nahulog. And slowly, he was helping me to recover the money na nahulog. question, in that situation, can I say that I am higher than him because he was helping me? No. And vice versa. Can I say that I am weaker than him because I cannot do the task myself? Answer, no. This guy is simply just helping me to get the money na kumalat sa sahig. No one is higher than the other. No one is the master. No one is a slave. No, wala. Ezer yun. A person who is simply helping another person. That's what you mean by ezer in the original context of this passage. And later on, in the Bible, lalo pang in-establish yung sex differences, yet both are valuable. It's reflected in the book of Romans. Sinabi ni Paul yan. I like the principle behind this passage, right? Kino-compare yung church into different parts of the human body. Sabi ni Apostle Paul, in the church, iba-iba tayo ng role para tayong iba-iba ng body parts. Some people are eyes, some people are hands, some people are head, feet. Iba-iba, di ba? Different. Although we are different, does that mean one is better than the other? The answer is no, because as you can see in the passage, ang sinasabi ni Paul dito, these different body parts cannot say, kaya nga dito, can't say to another body part, I don't need you. Why? Because all those body parts need each other. All of them are valuable in the body of Christ. All of them will take care of one another. Again, although they are different, all of them have the same value. No one is higher than the other. One needs the other. Ganun din pagdating sa sex differences. You apply that biblical principle. Sex differences are real. Male brain different from female brain, which translate to certain psychological characteristics. Iba ang ugali ng lalaki, iba ugali ng babae. But does that mean one is better than the other? One is higher than the other? No. Both are equally valuable. Okay? Big idea number 3, these sex differences can be reinforced or be equalized by the environment. Let's go back to gender stereotypes. Again, ano ibig sabihin ng stereotypes? Expectations natin yan. Pag babae ka, dapat ganito ka. Pag lalaki ka, dapat ganyan ka. Now, ano yung nagpapalakas ng gender stereotypes? Why are these stereotypes still persistent in a given culture? What will make it stronger? What will reinforce these stereotypes? Answer, in the cultural level, mga policies and cultural practices. Kaya nga, going back to my picture right here, I hope you can connect the idea, no? Kaya yung picture ko dyan, eto, yung kamay, meron siyang sinishape na pot, right? Yung kamay dito is the environment. Yung pot dito na sinishape, that's the stereotype. So what we expect from being a boy or being a girl highly depends on how the environment is shaping the stereotypes. Yan yung point ko dyan, kaya ginamit ko yung picture na yan. Alright? And let me give you some examples how the environment can shape the stereotypes that exist in a society through policies and cultural practices. Yan yung nagre-reinforce ng gender differences. For instance, in a given culture, ano yung mga activities that we expect men and women to participate in? Let's say yung pagtatag of war. O, sino ba talaga ang dapat naglalaro dyan? Sino ang mas quote-unquote bagay dyan? O, what does the culture practice in terms of job opportunities? Sino ba ang inaalaw ng kultura in a certain job position? Halimbawa, yung pagiging engineer, o yung pagiging doktor, o yung pagiging pilot. Ano ang sinasabi ng society dyan? Pang babae lang ba yan o pang lalaki? O, nakaka-contribute yan. Whether gender stereotypes will be reinforced. O, what else? Certain courses in college, o nursing. Para kanino ba yung mga course dyan? Sino ba talaga ang dapat mas nag-nurse? Let's talk about gender typing. Going back, di ba? O, ano yung mga toys na dapat nilalaro ng mga batang babae versus mga toys nilalaro ng mga batang lalaki? How about certain social, cultural activities like inuman? Sino ba ang inaalaw natin mag-inuman? Sino ang mas bagay na nag-iinuman? Nakaka-contribute yan. What kind of gender stereotypes will persist in our society? Isa pang powerful force in our society would be the media. Halimbawa, yung media, dadagdagan pa ng media ng ganyang mga ideas, no? Gagawa sila ng mga ganyang digital contents. Kapag female brain ka raw, ito ka dapat. Ito laman ng utak mo pag babae ka. Ito ang laman dapat ng utak mo pag lalaki ka. So when media releases these kinds of ideas, it can further contribute to the reinforcement of certain gender stereotypes. Even sa mga pelikula natin, no, although part pa rin ng media yan, ano ang role ng lalaki sa isang pelikula? Ano ang role ng babae sa isang pelikula? Now, those movies can contribute to how to the things we expect from boys and girls. Movies that we watch. From the media, let's jump to the government, specifically our political leaders. Meron ding mga contributions yan eh. How our leaders see maleness and femaleness. Remember social learning theory in psychology. We end up internalizing the values, the thinking, the practices of people we look up to, specifically our leaders. Kaya kapag may mga political leaders tayo na nagaganyan, may mga ganyan silang mga beliefs, merong epekto yan sa current gender stereotypes ng society natin. Okay? So, ganun ka-powerful yung environment in reinforcing the existing gender stereotypes. Now, let me just close this lesson with a very important question. No? Is gender equality possible? Kasi marami mga tao talaga, isa yan sa mga hinahangad nila, na sana dumating yung panahon, equal yung babae at lalaki. Sabi nga dito, no, can we finally stop talking about male and female brains? Hindi na issue yung sex difference. Ang issue na lang, parehong tao yan. Therefore, dapat parehong opportunities. Now, here's the thing. I want to clarify something on this. Is gender equality possible? Before we answer this, let me just explain to you what this question should not ask. Alright? We are talking about gender equality here, not same-sexness. So to answer this question, can we finally stop talking about male and female brains? The answer is no. We cannot stop talking about this because this is natural. This is biological. Hindi mo pwedeng hangarin in the future na sana in the future yung male brain and female brain structurally the same na lang. Kasi nakaprogram na yan. That's the way it is. That's the world order since creation. Male, female, biologically different. So wag tayong umasa na one day in the future, mawawala yung structural difference ng male and female brain. Hindi mangyayari yan. Because that is something controlled by nature. Pero when we talk about gender equality, ayan, diba sinabi ko nga sa inyo, iba yung sex sa gender. O yung gender, which is cultural, which is under the word nurture, when we talk about same expectations, same opportunities between males and females, same treatment, ang sagot ko dyan, it is a resounding, yes, yan, pwede yan. Pwede mo talagang ma-achieve yung gender equality, especially in societies where seemingly ang laki ng disparity ng males and females. In that level, that's possible. And what's the key? Ano yung pwede natin gawin para yung pagkakaiba ng maleness and femaleness more or less maging closer? The key is culture change. Remember, gender is about culture. Kaya, dyan ka ngayon, action. Dito ka dapat mag-a-adjust. Wala kang pwedeng gawin sa brain. Male and female brains, they already exist. When the person is formed inside the mother's womb, huwag na natin pakialaman yon. But in the cultural level, when we talk about gender equality, yan pwede. Pero yun na nga. The question now is, ano yung mga practices, ano yung mga policies or even sometimes even even ang tawag doon legislatures, laws na pwede nating ipasa or i-practice para mag-achieve ng gender equality. Yan yung mga important questions eh. One way to do that is let's learn from those societies na mukhang successful in terms of maintaining a good gender equality. A more technical term for that is gender gap. These are the following countries na yung gender gap maganda. Maliit lang yung gap between males and females. When it comes to opportunities, when it comes to treatment, ayan. Halos pareho lang yung treatment sa mga babae at lalaki. Yan. Believe it or not, Philippines, based on the data, is top 6 in the world. Siyempre, ang nangunguna dyan, Norway. Let's just talk about the top 3, no? Norway, Finland, Sweden. In these societies, the opportunities being enjoyed by males are the same opportunities being enjoyed by females. So what can we learn from them? Yan yung dapat natin gawin. Lalo na kung may nakikinig na government official, no, who is after gender equality, let's study these countries. What are their practices? What are their policies? What are their gender schema about being a male and female? Gender schema meaning ito yung kanilang mga beliefs about maleness and femaleness. Baka pwede nating pag-aralan ano yung mga gender schema nila, ano yung mga practices nila, mga policies nila, and educate our people on this. Baka pwede nating i-adapt yung ibang mga practices and policies ng mga bansa na yan to improve the gender gap or to lessen the gender gap between males and females. Or maybe you can also do the reverse. Diba? Ito naman, the following are the countries na talagang based on the data, worst countries daw for women because ang layo ng disparity ng males and females. Specifically, mas lamang ang mga males than females dito. Males are much more valued than females in these societies based on the data. So you do the reverse. Ganun din. Ano yung mga practices dyan? Mga policies? Ano yung gender schema? And what can we learn from these countries that maybe we can use, again, to improve or to lessen the gender gap between males and females? Diba? Magandang exercise yan to do. Especially if you are a policy maker. No? Oo. So in closing, again, here's the question that I want to ask everyone. When we talk about differences, males and females, are we naturally different or are we nurtured differently? Naturally different or nurtured differently? What's the answer? If you can follow my line of thinking based on this lesson, the answer is what? Both. Pareho. Pareho tayong naturally different. At the same time, we are nurtured differently. So there are two psychological forces that explain sex and gender differences. And what are those? The biological force and the cultural force. Yan. But regardless, whether it's biological force or cultural force, again, ano lang yung point natin dito? Differences exist. Iba talaga ang lalaki sa babae. Iba ang expectations sa pagiging lalaki, sa pagiging babae. And that's not necessarily bad. Huwag nating abusuhin yung idea of sex differences. Although we are different, the sexes are different between each other or from each other, huwag natin gagamitin yung differences na yon to assign higher value over the other sex, to give more opportunities than the other sex. Because if you do, nagiging sexist ka na. Closing assignment, no, before we go, ito magandang exercise to, no. Let's go back to these gender stereotypes na kanina ko pang pinapakita, no. I want you to do this exercise. Isa-isahin nyo yung mga stereotypes dyan. And then, I want you to study that stereotype, whether that stereotype comes from a biological reason or that stereotype is purely cultural. Diba, going back to my diagram a while ago, ito yung model na pinopromote natin in this lesson, right? Yung differences ng babae at lalaki galing sa biological and cultural forces. So, kung babalikan mo yung gender stereotype, alin kaya dyan Aling mga female and male characteristics or expectations in this gender stereotype, sa tingin nyo, yung pwede mong i-trace sa, kaya ganyan yung expectation kasi may biological reason yan. Alin dyan yung, kaya ganyan yung expectation kasi purely cultural yan. Gawa-gawa lang talaga yan. That's a good exercise to do, to further reinforce your knowledge about sex differences. Alright? So that's it. I hope you learned something about our lesson for today, which is about, again, the biopsychology of sex differences. If you have any questions, lagay nyo lang dyan sa comment section. If you know anyone na kailangan niyang marinig itong lecture na to, feel free to share this video to that person. Thank you everyone for listening. Sir Howard here. God bless everyone. Bye-bye.